Wednesday, and on today's webcast, as well as future episodes, the legendary ski racer to my right, Bode Miller. I think a gentleman who kind of, to the audience that's likely listening today, doesn't need much of an introduction. We'll hear much more from him later. And Mr. John Emery, who's the CEO of Alpine-X. John, we're glad to have you here, and Bode and I are glad to welcome you back to Montana. I know for everybody at home, thank you for joining us. We also want to let you know we're broadcasting, if you will, live from the MBARW headquarters here in Bozeman, Montana. So with that, Bode and I are welcoming John from Washington, D.C. area to Montana, and you got up on the hill at Big Sky yesterday, and we're up shredding the gnar. How was that yesterday?
Well, being from the East Coast, I mean, it's spectacular. The perfect weather out here, perfect conditions, and just a fantastic experience. Hospitality all throughout Bozeman, Big Sky, just exceptional.
Good deal. Well, you're welcome at our fire always. We're glad to have you here for certain.
I appreciate that.
So this is a first of a great many webisodes coming your way on the future of snow sports. Broad-ranging topics, everything from climate change, being more inclusive in the sport, and more. But today, because of timeliness and more, it's a somewhat obvious place to start, particularly with the gentleman to my right. Today we're going to start with, not focus on, but start with discussion around the Winter Olympics that are, Thursday. Thursday's the first day of the men's speed training over there in Beijing at the Winter Olympics. So, Bode, I'm going to kick off with you. We're going to go straight to it. Every Winter Olympics, every Summer Olympics, the 2, 3, 4, 10 days leading up to the games, there's always the hype, the angst, there's stuff. Are they going to be ready? There's all the things going on coming into it. And we get to see that as consumers, but you were a 5-time Winter Olympian. So the question I have for you is, what's in the mind of an athlete right now? You know, say it's Monday and you're in Beijing, 4 days away from the first training runs on speed. And Beijing is pretty darn unique. It's a kind of a violent convergence of COVID-related issues in a big way. You have the challenges on some of the human rights violations being talked about quite a bit in the press, whether or not NBC is going to cover them, how there's so much going on always, but this case, there's even an extra layer. Let's put yourself in the shoes of any of the many athletes you know that are there. What's your angle? What's your perspective on the games as you come into Beijing?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously different for each athlete. There's guys who are more experienced who have kind of, seen this. Obviously, Korea was a different experience for a lot of athletes the last time out. And I think people are now normalized to the COVID routine a bit. It's not as bad as it was, I think, for the summer athletes, where they really were straight into it. And there was, off-season delay and all that stuff. But, it is a bit surreal when you're coming into it, especially, first Olympics for some of these athletes. The time leading up to it is actually shocking because you have this break. I mean, normally World Cup doesn't have a break. The Olympics is a 3-week break. And there's, for most of these athletes, they'll be racing in 1 or 2, or in some cases 3. Very unusual to have an athlete, race in all 4 disciplines. So over 3 weeks, they're really looking at, 2 or 3 days, most of them, of competition. And that's a big change. And I think it gets to some of them. They're used to kind of giving it everything they have in a race that's separated by hundredths of a second, and then immediately moving on, because you can't take a loss or a win into the next, some people keep momentum going, but, and I think that's really disruptive. So a lot of it is the coaching staffs are really trying to twist and adjust the athletes' expectations and get them into a different mindset, which for me was always one of the big challenges and problematic. I like to go in there and do my thing, and everyone kind of is trying to give you advice on how to do it. And, it really starts to hit you at opening ceremonies typically. I mean, the training runs this year, because there was no test event, so everyone's seeing these hills for the first time. Right. There's going to certainly be stress around that. Anytime you're running the first guy to the gate, right? It's like test dummy. But yeah, they'll be really dialed in on and focused, and that actually helps, right? You have to be hyper focused on the training runs because you're trying to get as much information as you can. But then when the hype really starts ramping up is that opening ceremonies and that process. That's when it hits all these athletes that this is not a typical World Cup. It's a totally different scale, and the energy that you feel and therefore the nerves is exponential.
By the way, curious, how does this prepare for an athlete compared to the World Championships? It's really,
Yeah, it's. I mean, logistically, they're virtually the same. World
Right.
Championships is over the same span of time, and it is what it is. It moves around and it chalks off a little chunk of time in the middle of a World Cup season. But in terms of the prestige, the hype, the history, and the outcome, the impact that the outcome has, right? World Championships is kind of an inside the ski industry, inside the sport of alpine skiing
Right.
accolade. The Olympics is a transcendent, outside of every sport, really. That resonates with every person more or less on the planet. So, the pressure, the way they deal with that, and the way they put expectations on themselves. And I mean, again, it's one of those things. It's skiing is particularly challenging because it's separated by hundredths of a second. It's an outdoor sport. There's a million variables that are completely out of the control of these athletes, and it only happens once every 4 years. I mean, you could go in being the best and have just bad luck with weather or some other nuanced variable play into the outcome, and you're waiting 4 more years to get another shot at it, and that's just brutal. I mean, like we've seen it, guys finishing 200ths out of third, or me tying for third in my last Olympics. Those are things that you really, I think, as you get older and you've done it a bunch of times, you have perspective on. The young guys, I think, have a little bit of sort of naivete in there, and they can just kind of go for it. But it really is, when you look back, it's remarkable seeing how many people just barely missed that would have changed entirely their legacy.
from your first games in Nagano in '98 to your last Winter Olympics, Vancouver.
Sochi.
Sochi, excuse me, 2018, excuse me. How is it different? Speaking about being new, fresh, coming into the games, and then how did that look for you coming into Sochi?
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's a huge amount of time. There's just no way to compress a 5 Olympic span. But, I had a really great experience in Nagano. Coming in there, no expectations. I was, didn't have to do any of the annoying hard work, press and all the other stuff. And
it was different for you, Sochi.
And I was ultimately like convinced that I was going to win. I mean, no one thought I had any remote chance. And of course I crashed in both my events a bunch of times, but I really did believe, like, okay, I'm going to go out there and, and crush this thing. But, it was just a unique environment. Japan is incredibly supportive, huge sports fans, and they were just so friendly and welcoming. Their culture is just, in my opinion, their culture is really advanced. They're just really good people. And that was great to have my first Olympics there. And then, as I went through, obviously, '02, I was much more prepared. I was just more skilled and had more of the variables kind of, dialed in. '06, I was coming off one of the great seasons I had, overall World Cup title, and winning in all 5 disciplines in 17 days the year before, and really got overwhelmed by the entire package. Not so much the Olympics specifically, but my obligations, team, media, all the stuff, and really didn't respond as well as I would have hoped that I could have. But
that success had you getting pulled a lot of different directions, right?
Yeah, and our sport is not well equipped to support athletes in that regard. If you can't figure it out yourself, you're just dead meat. And I was, and that's the facts. But then in 2010, I mean, when I came away with a set of medals, I was nowhere near fit. I mean, I'd retired the year before. I came into the season. I unretired in the fall with no preparation. Lindsay had taken all my skis. So there was a whole bunch of stuff that I really had to sort through, but I had so much experience at that point. And that games in particular was really challenging for the rookies, for the younger guys, because there was weather delays and there was all these things that you could just see it. I mean, some of the favorites there were so cooked mentally by the time the race happened, because it had been delayed for 5 days in a row and they couldn't train. And, that was sort of a true application of my experience there to come through. Like I knew how to do it. I'd done it several times before, and I knew how to pace myself, how to just let go when you're all ramped up to start. In some cases, guys were in the start gate and then race delayed. And that just smokes you. I mean, you're just, and yet I could manage it. And that was mainly what got me medals, because I certainly wasn't skiing as well as I had in previous years. But I was able to dial up as much of the variables I could and really get the best performance out of myself.
That's outstanding games. So relative to, let's switch our attention to the U.S. team, men's, women's Alpine team. What are you seeing in that team? Folks that you like, you know, there's some obvious favorites like Michaela coming into the games and all disciplines really. Who do you like on the U.S. team? Who do you think has a lot of promise? Who might be a dark horse? Who, you know, folks at home may not think I've never heard of that person. There's no way that person's going to end up on a podium.
Yeah, I mean, it's a short list of favorites. You know, it starts and ends with Michaela.
Right.
You know, that's really it. I think she has a very good chance to win in 3 events. I think she can win Slalom, GS, and Super G. And, you know, and she's shown that kind of, you know, discipline, focus, and ability to perform on that sort of very big stage. But as you said, you know, it's been a transitional phase for World Cup. The Swiss are super strong on the men's side. Marco Odermatt, which I think anyone who watched, I picked it up in the Korea Olympics and sort of said, look, this guy, he is the sort of next superstar, and he's racing 3 events and he's got 1,200 World Cup points right now, which is like, I mean, that's enough to win the overall World Cup title. Yeah. And it's in just the beginning of February. So, I mean, the guy is super strong, really skilled, and yet doesn't have the same Olympic experience that some of the other guys who are behind him. And that makes it exciting for me. The U.S. guys have experience, which is good, right? But they just don't have the talent, the raw speed. Certainly the fact that it's a new course and there hasn't been, you know, a lot of history there, I think plays into the veterans, because the veterans kind of know how to adjust to that. The rookies, you know, yes, they're seeing a lot of courses for the first time, but they don't necessarily know how to ramp up their speed or execute with no mistakes, which is typically what it takes to win in the Olympics. But, you know, Bryce coming off a win in Val Gardena earlier this year, his first World Cup win.
Go Bryce.
You know, and he's a huge kid. He's 6'8", and there are certain, I haven't seen the course there, but there are certain things that it just helps to be that tall. His shock absorbers are longer, so if it's a lot of terrain like Val Gardena, the bumps are smaller relative to his total size. So it's like, you know, they should have smaller bumps for the smaller guys, but that's not the way World Cup works. So
you think the course, the speed venues at Beijing for the Winter Games might actually suit a fellow like Bryce?
Possibly. You know, I've heard that it's a fairly tame course. And when it's a fairly tame course, they typically put in terrain. They add little bits of variance just to keep it from being, you know, too basic. So until we see it, I can't say much, but certainly Travis, you know, has some of the best gliding ability in the world.
Kid can ride a flat ski, can't he?
And you know, I don't know what they're going to do with the other guys, Nyman, you know, a few Goldberg, who certainly have speed, but again, it's, you know, and I love the U.S. guys. I'm friends with all of them, but they just are outmatched really and outclassed by, you know, Kilde and Odermatt and Bat Voits, who's been around forever and won multiple downhill titles. Those are guys who just, for your money,
there you go.
You're kind of, if you're trying to overlook them, you're
in the off chance that Bryce and Travis are watching, I think Bode just threw it down for you guys. Go throttle down, right?
All right. Americans have a great history of breaking through and showing up and, you know, putting down inspirational performances. I mean, it's happened as long as I can remember with Bill Johnson and Tommy Moe and, you know, a bunch of people. Andrew Weibrecht, right? His only top 3s are in Olympics. And I think that's something that is in every American skier, and it's in their mind, and it's an asset really. They come in there knowing that of all the different people in that race, they're the most likely historically to put down their best result. Right.
Well, pushing the clutch, we'll shift gears a little bit into Alpine-X, and most folks that are tuning in and watching us today and will watch the rebroadcast of this, if you will, are aware of your association with Alpine-X. And before I ask John a couple questions about Alpine-X, the why and the thinking, the ethos around that, what compelled you, what is intriguing to you about Alpine-X, you know, particularly on the heels of talking about the largest stage of the Olympics and the Winter Olympics in Beijing. What's intriguing about Alpine-X and what's going on with this program?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's a little bit of a lateral leap. I'll try to make it quick, but like in the U.S., we have 350 million people. We have spectacular athletes. We generally dominate in most sports that we compete, even internationally, track and field. And There are cultural things where we are behind, like soccer, right? That we're catching up and we're producing.
Thanks to Ted Lasso.
World-class soccer players. But in skiing, there's a huge barrier to entry, right? Soccer, there isn't. You just need a ball and you can go out and kick it around. But culturally, there was a barrier there. It just wasn't that common in enough areas. Skiing has been stunted in terms of which athletes we draw into that sport to see how good they could be in the U.S. because not very many athletes in America are exposed to skiing. So we're taking 1/10% of our best athletes in this country, and we're selecting the best ones out of those. And even within that, there has to be means. They have to be geographically, located near mountains or near
within
snow.
reach, yeah.
And that's really the ultimate insult to the sport, is that we have all these athletes who could be Olympians, world dominators, but they're never even exposed to the sport. And for me, that is the driving force behind this, is Alpine-X has the ability to offer them at least the exposure to the sport, and then start to maybe develop a culture where it's not so crazy for kids in Atlanta, Georgia to go skiing every weekend, whereas now that would be crazy, or Texas or whatever. It's only a very elite few who travel up to these resorts. And that, I think, is going to be really interesting to see develop. That's the part I'm the most excited about. Outstanding.
Well, John, you're up. Tell us a little bit more about Alpine-X and how you've developed the vision. And I would also say compliments. I think Bode and I have commented on this and seen this. Gosh, we're years away from the first facility opening up in Fairfax, right? And but gosh, you guys have the kind of this presence of folks in folks' minds and the overall footprint as if you've been open for half a year. So what are you guys doing? And by the way, I'm going to throw a bunch at you. Indoor skiing is not new. This is not right. Tell us a little bit about Alpine-X.
I mean, there's over 100 indoor skiing facilities around the world right now.
Yeah.
So in the U.S., what we're really trying to do is attack the barriers that Bode mentioned. The geography, by building close to major urban centers where people live, to make it easier and more time-friendly to come out and learn to ski or improve their skills. But the big push is on affordability. One of the biggest hurdles, even for me as a kid, I did not start skiing until I was an adult. Did not have the family economics, lived out in Virginia outside of Washington, D.C., wasn't a natural place to learn to ski if you weren't from a ski family.
Right.
But I learned to love the sport after that. But we're really focused on affordability, not just to create more competitive skiers. That's a big element of what we can provide, but really creating a resort atmosphere for the whole community where everybody can participate in some form or fashion and have the same experience that we get when we go to an outdoor ski resort. By putting it close to people, making it affordable, by adding in other experiences so that it's not just about developing skills for skiing and boarding. So people that want to come and just have a good time in the snow can sled, they can tube, lots of other activities that they can do while they're there building that up. But the big focus really is on affordability. That's what opens us up to the entire community. Bode mentioned 350 million people. We want to build resorts that aren't just open to everybody, but that actively are designed for everybody in the community to be able to have a great experience. Regardless of their economic background, regardless of their cultural background, regardless of their family history of skiing or boarding, we want to really open that up to everybody in the community.
And how does Alpine-X do that? How is the proposition different for Alpine-X versus maybe the 100 other facilities that exist that are indoor skiing?
So what we're really doing compared to traditional resorts deal with seasonality. So by being open year round, we're able to spread our cost throughout a year.
Right.
That helps tremendously with affordability. In terms of appealing to broader groups of people, our idea is to have group shared experiences where people can come, enjoy the facility. They don't all have to do the same thing while they're there. So those of us that grew up skiing or learned to ski, when we go with groups of friends or family, not everybody wants to spend the same amount of time skiing or boarding. Right. Some people want to do other activities. By creating an environment where they can have these shared experiences, but everybody can cater their specific experience, to what they really want to do. They're not just sitting around at the end of the day waiting for their friends to finish, waiting for the kids to finish. For me, that's really what brought me back in. I'm not a competitive skier. I'm a very average skier who really enjoys facilities like Big Sky yesterday. But by doing that, we're creating the environment where people like me, people without much background, can really bring people, have these shared experiences. When I got into it, I got back into skiing, as my kids were growing up, for shared experience with my kids. As my kids grew, now we hang out with friends as a chance to have a bonding experience in a healthy way. So everybody loves a nice beach resort, but when you're skiing, it promotes health, it promotes wellness, and you get the bonding experience at the same time.
And I mean, obviously, Andy, super experienced in resort development management through your career. We've seen that everywhere right now. We've seen resorts trying to add other experiences there so that you could get 3 other people who go on a ski trip, who maybe ski one day, or if it's really nice weather, they'll go skiing. But if it's not nice weather, they don't want to be out there on a morning like this morning for me, where it was blowing 50 miles an hour and pounding snow. And, I think that's a really obvious thing you can understand, because every resort has really, and they've also tried to, what do we do in the shoulder seasons, and how can we be a 4-season resort where they're adding mountain biking and all these other activities so that the resort can, again, spread cost out and not be just trying to pack all their money in those few months where the snow's there. And the fact is, it's really logical that you're doing that. And I think it's, it's going to be interesting because you have the ability to build it sort of from scratch, right? So you can really kind of pick and choose what's the most relevant for this group of people that surrounds this, and what's going to bring the most people in and, cause the most fun, I guess, is ultimately the goal.
And the locations. So the locations are key. When we're building within 20, 30 minutes, an hour of where people live, it's not as big a time commitment. So everybody can get a great experience. You can do it on an evening after school, after work, come out, build your skills. You can do it when it's not so busy. Growing up in the Mid-Atlantic, when I started to learn to ski as a 20-something, it's intimidating. You work during the week, so you go on a weekend.
Right.
If you happen to have good conditions, you're at a really crowded place because everybody has the same idea. That's an intimidating place to learn and to relax and have fun. And skiing for us is all about having fun, right? So by building close to where people live, they can have the experiences in smaller chunks of time, come out on a Wednesday after school and work on your skills so that when you go to the outdoor experience, you get a lot more out of it. That was one of my first thoughts was, if I go to Colorado skiing, if I can work on my skills building up to that, I get a lot more of that experience when I'm there.
And John, I want to hit on that. At lunch, we were talking about I was grabbing a few analogs. Certainly indoor climbing has gone so well and grown so much. Gosh, it's heading into an Olympic sport now, right? And if you're indoor climbing, that doesn't mean you're going to be going out to Yosemite and being on a rock jock for the rest of your life.
Right.
And the one I threw at you was Slater's wave device.
That's great.
Right?
Yep.
And so there could be folks that end up surfers in one of those facilities built in Nebraska and never go to Southern California or North Shore of Oahu. Tell me more about how you think you reach out. Sounds a little bit altruistic right now. You reach out to so many people, make it accessible. I get it. Lower barriers to entry on distance traveled, expense, and more. But are these people that will just remain at an Alpine-X facility, or is the goal to really kind of have this be a gateway to,
That's a great question, because the answer is it's a mix.
Right.
And we do have a huge social mission as part of our design for the entire community, but it's beyond that. It's not just a social mission, it's also our business model.
Right.
The reason that we can build a successful resort in these locations is because we're going to attract a much wider group of the local population. So you have to do that to be able to justify the cost of these facilities. You're spreading that cost out, but you also are bringing in a lot of people who may not ultimately transition to outdoor, and that's fine. But we view ourselves as very complementary to the outdoor experience. We will encourage it. We'll be sending brand new trained skiers and boarders to all kinds of outdoor experiences, local, regional, national. They'll be coming out of our facilities And when they show up, they'll get a far better experience when they're there. The other piece to it is the health and wellness. It's fun working on this kind of business where our core activity promotes health and wellness. The activity itself is a healthy activity, but it's the actual thought process of it's a reason for people to stay in better shape. It's a reason to work on your health and wellness. You want to be better at this sport. The way you do that isn't by just showing up and skiing or boarding, it's working on your fitness throughout the year. So we have a really broad view of the impact that we can have as healthy, clean, fun, all at the same time.
I'm going to hit pause real quick. And just a reminder for those of you at home that are participating, thank you again for your time. I think you've probably all figured it out by now, but we're fielding some questions that are coming in via the Zoom link or the Zoom website, and I'm being fed a few of those. And I'll hit on those towards the end. There's a couple, three we already have that are quite good. Please keep those coming in. And if for some reason on today's broadcast, if you will, we don't get to them, one of the three of us will get back to you. And I mentioned earlier, this is a series, and we'll actually potentially cover some of those topics down the line. I know a couple of the questions relate to inclusivity and outreach to many different folks that don't normally come into the sport, and that's very much in our mind. We'll probably actually build a full webisode on that. But back to you, Bode, on this, your perspective on, and we are going to talk a little bit about climate change. That was one of the questions that was very much on our minds, maybe towards the end. But Bode, relative to what they're designing, what kind of influence have you had? What's been the connectivity with a guy who knows how to go really fast on skis and one of the best on the planet? In indoor skiing, what's the connection there? What's the meaning?
We reached out to Bode early on, really for help to make sure that the facilities we built could help train competitive skiers. So we were looking for advice. The very first call that we had together, we started talking about the social mission, and Bode was like, "This, I've been focused on this my entire career."
Right on.
I did not realize the depth of just passion in the ski industry to really democratize skiing, both in terms of economics, in terms of culturally, of opening the doors up to everybody that would have an interest in the experience. So it was just really refreshing. And that's how, Andy, you as well, we all met and really got to try to build this business together. Is the competitive skiing element was why we reached out, but it really is the social mission that kind of, I think, kind of brought us all together.
That's great.
We spent many days in my World Cup career skiing at indoor resorts because the outdoor conditions were not good enough to make it useful for us. And we'd have races coming up, and we'd go and travel to these indoor resorts, primarily in Europe. And it was shocking how much value we got out of that. I won a slalom on Atomic that year in 04-05 season, coming straight out of training in Dusseldorf. And you can change the surface really efficiently, and typically there's limiting terrain, but when you're talking about setting up scenarios and trying to work on very specific things and getting volume, there's nothing better. I mean, you can get 35 runs in 2 hours, and there's just no substitute for that. So I think there was a very natural conversation around that. John and the team were wondering, how do we do this? We just don't want to make any big mistakes. And I was like, yeah, this is exactly what you need to do. It's nothing crazy. It's not like you have to build a 400-foot head wall, but you do want to be aware of these things. And then very quickly, I think I did add a little bit of reassurance that is a very viable part of this, that it's not that we went and, we're seeking out these indoor locations in Europe as World Cup racers, and that they were beneficial. So I really do view that as a great part of this, but certainly a much smaller sliver versus the impact of everything. I think what you mentioned about the social sort of, I would say social and community components of this that I love to talk about, and I think it goes over people's head a lot of the time, but I always say, like, skiing taught me so much. It really does. It's one of those sports that really teaches you a lot. And I think for a lot of people are like, wait, what? Your instructor teaches you? It's like, no, the actual doing the activity teaches you about fear, risk management, humility, perseverance,
that one.
perseverance, discipline, and you alluded to it with your physical fitness. If you go ski, whether it's conscious or subconscious, you're like, I got to get in better shape, man.
Exactly.
And it's not just that. That's one. There's 1,000 of those aspects that it really impacts the way you view the world, the way you live your life, and it's just a remarkable sport. Obviously, I love it, but I think that's something that will ultimately resonate with these communities that are embracing an Alpine-X in their midst. Is that, wow, this is something that it's fun and great, but like parents can take their kids there and watch their kid develop in front of their eyes because they have to figure stuff out. It's problem solving and risk management and excitement and humility, because there's nothing more humbling than skiing. I think that was one of those sort of cultural impacts that maybe is overlooked for the most part.
So John, relative to social, we'll hit on this one more time and then maybe move to climate in a second.
Sure.
On this, we would talk about families and parents and kids spending time together on ski lifts. We've talked about that. In my opinion, raising racing ski racers as kids in Colorado, it was the time I spent with them driving to Crested Butte or Beaver Creek, but also on the chairlift on the ride up.
Driving back.
And driving back.
Usually with a pissed off kid.
I was going to say, there was that one race out of Crested Butte. Yeah, it was a long drive from Crested Butte home to Steamboat. But notwithstanding that, those are learning moments too, right? You talk about humility.
Absolutely.
Right?
You win, everyone's like, oh, I was one of the great racers. I think I won 5% of the races I was in. And
there's that.
That means 95% of the time I was not winning, and that's an important lesson to learn.
There's a Gretzky cliche or quote in there, right? But relative to Alpine-X, you have these facilities in key metro areas: Washington D.C. I'm going to make up a list: Dallas, Fort Worth, Atlanta, Georgia, Seattle, you name it. Those areas. Is this where families connect and do this and they go to the ski resorts? I know you're talking about a different strata, various types of customers coming into it, but how do you think about the ski resort business and the ski resorts that exist right now? Down the road from you, down at Snowshoe, West Virginia, all the way to my home mountain, Steamboat, and those resorts. How do you look at them? Are you replacing an experience, competing? How do you see them?
I mean, I'm heading to Snowshoe tomorrow.
Right. Well, we got you primed a little bit.
When I get back, what we do is we complement them. So we will. Our job is to bring new people into the sport, and have them get a better experience when they head to their outdoor resorts. And again, not everybody's going to do that. But the people that do, the people that want to do that, will have a huge impact on feeding people to those resorts. So from our standpoint, I mean, the outdoor industry will drive our business because a lot of what we're talking about, whether it's competition or even recreational skiers, I love outdoor skiing. Indoor skiing doesn't replace it for me. It will let me hopefully be a much better outdoor skier.
Right.
So that's in a nutshell what our real goal is.
Right. Now, I can tell you in the Rockies and the West Coast, the Pacific Coast, West Coast of the country, the ski resort business is not lacking demand right now, right? In fact, it's creating stressors and strains that it's not hard. You'll hit 3 or 4 major articles on this based on crowds at Christmas time and the like. So, the demand is most certainly there. And it's interesting to consider how you tap into that with Alpine-X going forward. But as it relates to the resorts and how they build out, how they view you, if you're running a ski resort, say you're running Steamboat right now, or you're running Snowshoe, here's great. You're watching this and going, okay, I'm understanding a little bit more about Alpine-X. How do I look at them? Are they taking food off my lunch tray or what's the deal?
We've had a lot of conversations with regional ski resorts. They're very interested in working with us for exactly this purpose.
Yeah.
They're great at training new skiers. On busy weekends, it's tough for them to handle the masses, both in people learning, plus more skilled people. So we can take a lot of pressure off that.
Yeah.
And really just continue to work with them. So I think it'll be a complete collaboration with all the ski resorts.
And they've tried for years, right? I mean, there's been 4,000 different initiatives of how to get never ever, first time skiers to be lifelong skiers. and it hasn't been successful.
It has not, no.
So, I mean, I view this as, sort of a godsend for them. I mean, they're all looking for, regardless of whether the person ends up in an East Coast resort or a Boyne resort or an Altera resort, the fact is there's enough transparency in the sport right now to know that more skiers is better, period, like for the industry. And I think it's pretty clear that this is going to produce how many and in which places. I'm sure that's where they're jockeying for, and in John's ear, like, hey, we send them our way. But as you said, there's pain points too. I mean, you can't have too many people in one spot. It does deplete the experience for that customer. So, I view it as really a very favorable thing for the resorts individually and the industry as a whole.
Yeah. And I know, John, we've talked in the past day or two on the chairlifts at Big Sky yesterday about that whole, Bode's right. I mean, in the resort experience, resort business, 29 different major resorts with which I've worked, we've sought to, but really never got off the ground on what I would call a meaningful, long-standing entry that has into the sport, that has the kind of experience that most would desire, right? Here's how to walk in ski boots. Here's how you carry skis. And these are things that folks it only takes about 5 minutes, kind of. Yeah. And you get this at many resorts, but it's not systematic. It's not programmed. And I think that's what you're planning to develop at Alpine-X.
Our job, I think it's simple, is to make that easier.
Right.
Right. I mean, I just reflect on my own learning, the trying to learn on a weekend, trying to learn as an adult. If we can make the process easier, for example, we have a separated learning area so that people learning, whether they're young kids or adults, aren't in the middle of everybody going up and down the hill.
Right.
Trying to take the stress out of the process. So if we can make it easier to get to, more fun to learn.
Right.
It was not fun the first few times I tried to ski. You're embarrassed. You're intimidated. You're trying to do more than you're ready to do because you're trying to stay with the people that you went with who know more than you do.
And you keep hearing that voice of your friends saying it's so much fun, right?
Right.
Well, and I think it's pretty clear that the big challenge there for these resorts that were trying to, these initiatives to bring in new skiers, they had to get them there. Either they were dealing with which is up in the mountains, not typically right in a massive population dense area. And even just getting somebody from Denver up into the mountains and then stacking on 6 other barriers to entry onto that. And I think this is really a unique opportunity and that's just Denver, not Houston or Miami or Tampa or Nashville or places where there's millions, hundreds of millions of people who you can drive 15 minutes and have an experience, right? And then at that point they've gotten through a lot of the barriers. Then when they make that decision, and of course there's a lot of people who economically it's not going to be feasible to go on a ski trip, right? But I mean, I know from my family growing up, my mom, and they would drive from New Hampshire out to Colorado. They'd throw all the kids in the back of a van and drive out there.
Wow.
And that's an old pastime that they viewed as one of the massive things that brought my family together. It was a really amazing experience, and they would just completely, bootstrap it. I mean, they weren't living in the lap of luxury, but nonetheless, there's still going to be a massive group of people who are coming to Alpine-X who certainly have the money to take, 2 or 3 trips each year. But they would never do it because they go to Hawaii or they go somewhere. That's just their mentality. But all of a sudden now introduced to this, and boom, you have a new lifelong skier who can afford to do and support kind of the upper echelon stuff. I was just touching on, I know we're going to go into climate, but I was thinking of a few years ago, I was in Aspen. It was over Christmas, New Year. So it was just mashed with people. And there was no snow on the top half of the mountain because they don't have snowmaking from halfway up that mountain up. Ajax. There was good snowmaking on the bottom, but it was insane. There was huge rocks. And I think, we are facing a different set of challenges for seasonality of skiing as well. And I just think it's awesome that we'll be able to pretty much guarantee good conditions, right? You don't need, you're not out there like doing your snow dance, waiting for the next storm. And that's going to be huge because, while it is going to be, difficult for these resorts as climate change continues to make, play its hand out, we have 12 months out of the year the ability to produce great environment for skiing.
I would imagine.
One quick
Go
thing
ahead.
on that, but even our conditions help the learning process.
Yeah.
So it's 28 degrees year round. There's no wind. The surface conditions are consistent year round. It's another little factor that makes it a little easier to learn. I want to touch on the economics again.
Yeah.
Because it's important to us that because we're open every day, if somebody's on a tighter budget, come on an evening. We're not going to be as busy, so you can learn in a less busy environment. We're going to be substantially cheaper than a weekend when the demand is higher.
Right.
We can kind of adjust the economics to fit different budgets.
Yeah.
And for in particular for kids who are underrepresented and don't have the family economics, even for our experience,
Yeah.
we're committing to over 1,000 visits a year at every resort where we pay for everything: food, lessons. We outfit people in winter jackets. They can show up in shorts and t-shirts, and we can teach these kids who wouldn't have an opportunity otherwise to ski or to board.
And I'm excited, as John and Bode know, there's a great organization called Share Winter, run by one of the great nonprofit executive director CEOs on the planet, Constance Beverly. And I think we're planning in a month or so having one of these webcasts with her. Boy, golly,
Definitely.
she's thrilled to hear about this. A lot more. She'll be a great person to make that real and to make that connect, because her mission is pure, real, and she's just outstanding.
Whatever we can contribute to that mission, we would love to do.
That's
Absolutely.
real. Well, we've made glancing blow references to it. Let's push in the clutch, talk about climate. As you guys know, I can talk for about 40 minutes about this minimum.
Yeah.
The science and law, the exigent threat, the existential nature of this, kind of what's ahead of us. Honestly, is a big part of me, frankly, that, like my friend Yvonne Chenard says, the least of our concerns is how long the ski season's going to be, or where we're going to ski. It is that kind of threat. Let's just get real about it. With that said, working inside a near moderate term view, Alpine-X, did you build it because climate's going to eradicate the ski business? And I don't think that that's the case, but obviously you're controlling ambient temperature, you're controlling humidity, you're able to make snow. But John, talk to me about your thinking on, we've talked about social, let's talk about the environmental side of things. What are the truths? Let's move beyond the speaking points and the politicization of this all critical topic into the core of what Alpine-X means, does, will do, won't do on this broad topic of climate.
So one of the first commitments we made, and I believe it's on our website, is to our environmental concerns. So I'll give you an example. Fairfax, our first site that we're building outside of Washington, we're putting in a tremendous amount of renewable energy through solar. We're doing everything we can. Climate change is a huge issue for us as well. We don't replace the outdoor skiing experience.
Right.
We complement it. So we're not building these to replace that experience because of climate change. We need to see as positive an impact to climate change as we can, not just for skiing. Again, let's get out of the talking points.
Yep.
It's just good for everybody. It affects everything. It's not just about how long our ski seasons are,
right?
Or so part of our commitment, and we're fortunate, our first facility is in a state, and in particular a county, that's very committed to long-term carbon neutrality.
Outstanding.
They are completely on board with the plans in our county. Our power company has set very aggressive goals. So we won't just be creating our own power to the extent that we have space, but we'll be buying renewable power as well to make sure that we have the best impact that we can have on the overall environment.
We've talked a lot at other ski resorts in California as customers, right? You can actually move through the PUC realm, and sometimes those regulated or those monopolies that are affirmed by governmental entities, and say, no, I'm just a customer. I want to buy real renewable energy, not the greenwashed fake version, but the real. And that's what you guys are doing in essence.
Absolutely.
In a favorable environment as it stands, correct?
Absolutely. It gets back into engineering. A lot of our technology comes out of Europe, where the focus on, frankly, again, environmental and energy efficiency is decades ahead of where we have been.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see the places that we're looking to build catching up with that, but we are catching up. So we're taking technology from places that have been more focused on this and bringing it to use in our facilities to get this. So it's not just about generating renewable, It's about minimizing usage in the first place. Those
Bode,
two combinations is what our focus is.
You're well-traveled and well-read on climate change. What's your broad perspective on this topic, skiing, ski resorts, and go ahead and move it into Alpine-X?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've witnessed it firsthand, and it's always a little frustrating. Although I've learned to deal with frustration through my teacher. Skiing has taught me to deal with frustration.
Some of your coaches,
I can put that into that category of people, claiming it's not real, and I've seen it for 35 years firsthand, and it's been really dramatic, and it's not slowing down. And I think we all are guilty of not doing the right stuff and not pushing the right buttons, but it's a really complicated system, and you need everybody pulling in the same direction. And right now there's just enough people still squeezing the lemon, if you will, on old technology, coal,
right,
and things where the infrastructure is just based around that. But the sad part is that it's going to impact lots of different pieces that are just, it comes down to, and I talked about this with my dad 25 years ago. I said, when people want to change it, when things really get real, is when it really starts to impact their lives.
Right.
Unfortunately, we've seen these insane storms and weather patterns, but they still are like, oh, that's just Mother Nature. And it's like, somehow it doesn't connect. Like, no, that's what it is. And it's smashed your house now 3 out of 5 years. Maybe it's time that you start, waving the flag around and getting on board. But, it's really having a significant impact on some of these industries, sports, and certainly we talked about it, the snow lines just moving up. What do you do when your base area doesn't get snow until January? It's like, in the top might be good skiing, but like those are just things that I fear, and I hope we can somehow turn the ship. But I said it to my uncle several years ago, that I wanted him to build something in New England, and he really, it was like so outside of his box of thinking that he couldn't even really have a conversation about it. But it's an amazing resource for a community, especially in a place like the East Coast, where people can travel from New York City. They're not unused to taking a 4-hour drive to get up to ski, and be able to do that 12 months out of the year, to me, is just, your returns are there, both economically, but then also just letting people do something like that, I think, is one of the unique things that technology is allowing us to do, right? It's like, go surfing in Nebraska, go skiing in July in New Hampshire or Vermont or New York. I think, I like seeing that stuff. Just maybe it's a little bit just kind of for fun, but I think it's, like I said, something like skiing to me holds a special place, because I think it's such a valuable sport to have people participate in, for all those ancillary reasons we spoke about.
As I mentioned, I'm going to really work hard to weave in some of the questions that we've received, and I have a few here with me, and they largely tie into the discussion to date, but so far this afternoon, but with a little bit different spin. Pivoting off of climate and moving into, here's Katie from Seattle, Washington, wanting to know about bringing an Alpine-X facility to Seattle, Washington. What are the plans for expansion, and how do you look at future sites?
So for expansion, first, all the cities mentioned today, other than Fairfax, are not on the official list yet.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, so
we've mentioned a lot of cities today. We can't build them all at once.
There you go.
But we will be announcing, we believe, our next couple relatively soon.
Yeah.
We think we can open at a minimum about 1 per year, and probably ramp that up as we grow. So we would expect to be throughout the U.S. relatively quickly.
Right. And this is, we'll start to transition out here in the interest of everybody's time. And like I said, we're going to stack up these questions if we don't get to yours. And keep in mind, this is one of many more webcasts to come. So there's going to be a deep dive, so to speak, in other topics. Bode, one of the questions relates to looking forward to the 2038 Winter Olympics. You and I have talked about this quite a few times. Lindsey Vonn, probably one of the best. Michaela's certainly giving her a run. I don't know where they stand on globes and medals, but Lindsey Vonn, not from a big famous hill or in her origination. Same with you. I mean, where you're from there's a lot of skiing, but it's not a hill that comes to kind of on the top 25 list on folks' minds. The big ski racers, where do they come from? Where do they originate? What role can Alpine-X legitimately play in building facilities that actually do generate racers for the 2038 Winter Olympics.
I mean, yeah, I came more or less from Cannon Mountain, but
No offense to Cannon Mountain, by the way. They're
great
great hill,
mountain,
great mountain.
but small and not a lot of state owned, so not a big marketing budget there to make sure they climb up into the Vale echelons. But Terry and Tyler Palmer from Attitash, right next door, were Olympians, and the Mayer brothers from up in Northwest Washington, where people would not expect. As you said, Lindsay from the Midwest, Buck Hill, and Christina Kosnick, a longtime veteran, same Buck Hill. But even Ingemar Stenmark and Anya Persson, two of the greatest overall skiers in the history of the sport, from a couple 100-foot tall bump up in northern Sweden. But they had lights, and they skied late into the night, and it's high enough latitude that they got snow early, and it stayed long into the spring. So they could just put in massive volume. And I think, I really do believe that in 10 or 15 years, we will look back on Alpine-X as the most impactful thing to happen to alpine sports, both riding and skiing. It's the most impactful thing I think that will have come around in the last century. And the reason for that is you're just giving access to a totally different demographic of Americans, and giving them an opportunity to discover if they like it, if they're good at it. And the transitional phase, this isn't just like here and then there's this whole other infrastructure that needs to be built to see an athlete go from the Fairfax site to an Olympian. A lot of the other stuff is in place already. They just have no idea that they would even want to be a skier or that they could be a skier. And this kind of that opening that initial door is the most critical piece.
So we're going to start wrapping it up. I'm going to turn it to you guys. Comments on anything. Anything goes. Alpine-X, Olympics, you name it. John, if you want me to prime the pump for you, I will. What are the one or two things that I haven't teed you up to speak about relative to Alpine-X and the tie to Bode and the future of skiing?
Well, I have one that I want to ask before we're over.
Got it.
Is what do you think of volume? Like that was always a thing. I mean, right? I work with Snowbond, and the big limiting factor there is volume. You can only have a couple people on one of those little slopes at a time. And it's really awesome and super impactful, but is there a volume that you have in your head? And is that going to scale with various sites, or is it going to be relatively stable?
So 16 hours a day, 365 days a year. So we can get volume in a very usable fashion to those that want it. So maybe you're coming at 7 a.m. if you want to get a lot of turns as a potential racer, because you're avoiding the crowds, and we can set the snow up properly and then convert it back over to recreational. So being open every day with unlimited hours, I mean, we can be open as long as there's demand, will help us get people volume.
It's a good, legit question.
Yeah. I was thinking like what resorts typically, what a million plus skier visits a year is some of the,
it's a handy number.
Those are the big ones. And I was just curious because obviously they have really short season relative to the
so you have a
year, but
140-day season, and you have a neighborhood of 12 to 19 days where you have compaction, where you're running a well above comfortable carrying capacity.
Right. We very intentionally will spread demand out, right? So it'll be self-regulating. So our experience doesn't need to be crammed into a specific season or specific weather conditions.
Right.
So very purposely, we need the weekend when there's the most demand to still be a fantastic experience. You can't have long lines at lifts. People are coming out for 2 or 3 hours of skiing. They're not doing a full day. You need to pack that in. So we can really get a ton of volume, even recreationally, by spreading out the demand over periods to make the experience better for everybody.
Yeah, obviously vacation time for kids at school.
Yeah.
And that's where I love this. Is like, that is a really tough one, right? I mean, we deal with it with my family being on the East Coast. They can only come out during breaks from school. Right. And that's when everybody's coming out. So the whole experience is like,
there you go.
Just less appealing, versus like. Yeah.
And not that there's anything wrong with dodgeball, but I would imagine a few phys ed teachers are excited to maybe use the facility as part of PE classes in the future around Fairfax, right? So John, just finishing though with, is there one or two thoughts that I haven't gotten into, items I haven't gotten into?
I mean, the single biggest thing that I'm just really proud of the ski industry, is their just complete commitment to what we're talking about socially. So to me, and I love the competitive aspect of it, but the idea of having experiences where we can do community building. I mean, we are a community asset. We're bringing everybody in the community in one form or fashion, whether they can pay or not. We've opened up, anybody can own a piece of our company. We're not, we want this to be in every location we are, a community asset, not just a big company extracting revenue from guests.
That's great. It's an honorable mission to state early at the outset on taking on such an endeavor. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up because that's actually a great segue into the next webisode on inclusion, webcast with Constance Beverly from Share Winter. We'll get back to you with the exact date and time on that, but you can anticipate a very spirited discussion about inclusion, something near and dear to all of our hearts, and the role that Alpine-X not can, but will be playing in that. A lot of big plans, and like I said, you can't find anybody more impassioned, more tooled up, really, to take this on and to help be a great partner with Alpine-X. Bode, thanks a ton. Time away from family, kids, coming all the way down here to Bozeman from Big Sky. It's awesome. Thanks a ton. John, thanks again for coming out to Bozeman, Montana. We'll look forward to seeing you here in a little bit. And for those of you who've spent time with us, you've sacrificed some of your time. Early evening for those on the East Coast, for those of you on the West Coast, late afternoon. But thank you for your time and giving us a few moments to talk about something near and dear to all of us, and that's skiing, the sport of skiing. And we'll look forward to seeing you for the next webcast of the Future of Snowsports. Thank you.